And we have a guest speaker, and we have Reverend Don Seiler who'll be speaking to us. Yay. Yay.
So the idea of this is celebrating ourselves. But in order to celebrate who we are, we got to get an idea about what we are. And a little bit of ideas that come about our stories. Sometimes when I introduce myself, I'll tell people that, I was a helicopter pilot, and then I was a wellness coach, and then a hospital executive, and then I was EMS helicopter pilot, and then. So there's a long list of things that I have done, and I might call that my life story. Well, about 3 months ago, David Brooks, who I agree with once a year, usually, suggested that we may have some things flipped around in terms of how we tell our story. For some of us, we have a life story. And for others, we talk about playing the game of life. My wife was an associate when she got out of law school. She was an associate at a medium-sized law firm. And if you want to be in a law firm, you have to learn how to play the game. There are rules in the game. There are things that you have to do. Sometimes you roll the dice. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes people just tell you how to play the game. After 5 years, she decided it was not a game she ever wanted to play again. But for many of us, we just keep playing the game. We just keep playing, trying to do the things that we think need to be done. So who's in charge when we do that? All those people out there, because it's not my game we're playing. We're playing somebody else's game by somebody else's rules, and they may even change the rules on us, and we don't even know how that works. I read a lot of, well, first of all, I read a lot of spiritual things. I also read a whole lot of what they call cozy mysteries. The British folk like to talk, like they like to kill somebody in the beginning of a book. That's about the end of the killing that goes on. And then you move on through the story and you go through many plot variations. That's how the story unfolds. It's all about plot. But guess what? None of you really are a part of a plot. Well, sort of. But the truth of it is your personality and what you bring to the book and the story is much more important than just how you fit into the plot. The plot is really more like the game of life. When I read those mysteries, it's just all about a little game and how it's played out. So what we really want to think about is what kind of people were involved in our life story. And most importantly, what did you bring to your life story? And I'm not talking about a list of dates and jobs, not a CV, not a resume, but what you brought. Can't read that very well, but most of you guys have probably heard the story or the quotation from Teilhard de Chardin, right? That we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, what Father Keating, this is Father Thomas Keating, what Father Keating suggests to us is that what's really going on for us is that we're divine. That we are really divine beings as humans, that human beings are divine. And so he doesn't have a separation there. His only suggestion is we just don't know it. We don't pay attention to it. Because sometimes when I will hear people talk about from, the quote from Teilhard, that quote says, you're all human until you die. And then you get to be the spiritual being. And I think what we hear from Charles Fillmore, what we hear from Myrtle Fillmore, and what we hear from Father Keating is that we are divine spiritual beings. Some people suggest you're both human and divine. I still want to disagree because I think we're all divine. Now, our ego gets to go out and pretend like it's in charge. The ego gets to come out and say, there's two things here. That there is this human part of me, and then there's this part of me that is divine. And what that encourages is a separation. It doesn't allow me to be fully who I am. I don't get to be who I really am. I don't get to be, no, I said who, what I am. So many of you have heard the story from Eric Butterworth about the wave and how we are waves and God is the ocean. A couple of other ways that folks look at that. And one of those ways, I just heard, I work with a group of Jewish meditation folks. And in our studies, they introduced me to a book on Jewish meditation practices. And in that book, which came out last year, basically the rabbi channeled Eric Butterworth in his story. Although the way he tells a story about this is even better in my mind than the way Butterworth tells it. And the reason I like this is because it really fits into a space of how I think. And of course, I always like when smart people write books, and I agree with them in that way. There's some sense that I must be smart because they paid him money to put it in print. But what the story goes is that there's, you know, how usually there are waves that are lower than others as they go towards and then there'll be a big wave. And so what goes on is that there's a small wave, and then right behind that small wave is a big wave. Well, the big wave yells at the small wave. It says, stop, stop. Oh my God, you've got to stop. And the little wave said, why? What's going on? We're just all traveling to the beach. And the big wave says, you don't understand. I can see what's going to happen here. And the little wave says, yeah, we're going to go to the beach. And the big wave said, but you don't understand. We're going to all die. We're going to hit the beach and we will no longer be waves. And so the little wave said, I can help you. You gotta understand. Big wave said, we don't have time for sitting here and meditating and cogitating and having conversation about what's getting ready to happen. We're gonna die in a matter of seconds. And the little wave says, I can do it right now, just listen to me. Just listen. You're not a wave. You're the water. Mm-hmm. You're not a wave. You're the water. I think that goes Butterworth one better. That tells us that we are all, as waves, we are all just manifestations of God. Mm-hmm. How did I say just manifestations of God? That was pretty stupid. I shouldn't say it that way, because being just a manifestation or an incarnation of God is a really big deal. It's a really big deal. Most of us, before we walked into a unity room, had the idea that there was only one incarnation. Only one. And yet here in unity, we learn that we are all incarnations. And I was just listening to a book about Meister Eckhart, and guess what? Meister Eckhart in 1300 said, guess what? We are all incarnations of God. We are all God incarnated, just like we said Jesus was. Now, of course, he got into a lot of trouble and they threatened to burn him at the stake and kill him in several ugly ways. So luckily, we don't have that problem. We can sit here in Austin, Texas, and think and understand, using our minds, understand where we are. Are we going to be able to go to another slide, you think?
Give it a try.
Okay. We'll try. There it
Hey!
is. So after the Sermon on the Mount, which is a very difficult thing for me to talk about, but I can have to study a lot to think about this. It really is. It requires a great deal of thinking in terms of switching from our standard English understanding of things. Got to understand where Jesus came from as a Jew. But Jesus told us that we're the light of the world. Now, what on earth does that mean? You know, when we were kids, we sang that this little light of mine, you know, hide it under the bushel. We did all that kind of stuff. But what did that mean? It was a cool little song. And we thought, well, if I'm the light of the world, it must be kind of cool. And this light I have must be kind of cool. But what did it really mean? And the truth of it is there is something inside of each and every one of us that can only show up from us, because there's no other you ever. So when we think about that, as you guys, whoever put that picture of me when I was in San Marcos, I really want to thank you. That was 15 years ago. You know, I really kind of appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That was that was, yeah. I like that. I thought it was bad advertising to have a 5-year-old picture of me there. So anyway, but the thing is that if you think about, as we sit here with gray hair or chemically altered hair or no hair or whatever it is you're showing up here with, what you're showing up here with is you are still showing up as the light of the world. It doesn't matter what kind of job you have now, what kind of job you have had in your life, because the illumination that you provide in all the nooks and crannies and corners of the world can only be provided by you. They change. It changes over time, but you're the only one. And that suggests to me what's important is that we talked about it in the daily word today. We got to work on staying physically here. We got to work on staying mentally here as much as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, when we talk about being mentally here, my brother-in-law had an automobile accident back in '91, and Houston Life Flight went in and picked him up, and Dr. Red Duke. Anybody here know about Dr. Red Duke? Okay, Dr. Red Duke plucked telephone poles and glass out of his face, did all kinds of things to put him back together. Could never quite put his head together. So he had challenges. And so as a consequence, he never had a job again afterwards. He was on disability through Social Security. And when I left Unity of North Houston, I came here, or we came to San Antonio. As soon as we did, we discovered he had cancer. And what the story here about, or what the story I'm trying to express is it's sad that he had cancer, sad that he had a car wreck, but he sat in his room and talked to people he knew from Dallas until he moved to New Braunfels in 2005. And then he would talk to people he knew in New Braunfels from 2005 to 2013, and people he knew in Tomball. All these people called to talk to him, to connect with him. And he's being connected with because he is a light. He was a bright, shining light who didn't always know what day it was. And it really didn't matter what day it was. Because his job, what was left for him to do, was to shine a light that only Bruce Harris could shine. And the last thing he did, he had a really difficult life. He was kidnapped by his aunt, and just terrible things happened. This was way before the car wreck. But the day before he died, he and I talked about, would he see his mother? Would he, Bruce, I don't know. I can tell you what I believe, but I don't know anything. I haven't died yet. I had no idea, Bruce. I said, what do you think? He said, I don't know. But he did ask me, do you think I'm going to be punished and sent to hell? And I said, no. I don't think so. Gotta remember he had 20 years of stuff. So anyway, the thing that happened though is just that day before, he and I were sitting there talking, and then he just glazed over. And he said, Mama, are we going home? Last words he ever spoke. The last light he ever shined was, Mama, are we going home? What does that mean? I don't know. I have no idea. Some memory, it's hard to know. But that light is what he maintained until he died. What are you, as this lady here in her very up-to-date hairdo, Imelda Shanklin talked to us about what we are. And of course, the idea of that we are a child, that we are children of God, that idea of being a child of God. But she goes beyond that to suggest to us that what we are is both an impersonal part of us and a personal part of us. And the impersonal part of us is that which is permanent. That's what's permanent. And that's what part of us, that is the part of us that is God. Each one of us have that part of God that where we are God. And the personal part is that part that becomes our personality. And remember, our personality can be changed, sometimes for the better. But personality, according to Mr. Fillmore, personality is that which is what we have become because of how we have responded and reacted to the world. So you may, for years, do something that in response to something your mother said 60 years ago, and she didn't even mean what you heard. But you respond in that way, and your personality gets built by preachers, teachers, and parents over time. And our opportunity is to go to that impersonal part, that individual part of us, which is that part of us that is that shining light of God. Not that part of us that got built by preachers and teachers. In fact, I just read an article, or read in the book Manifesting God, which is mentioned there with Thomas Keating. I just read where Thomas Keating suggests one of the most important things for us to do is just quit listening to preachers. He says, what we don't need is my idea of God, my idea of who you are and what you are. What you need is your idea of who you are and what you are. Now, I may give you some thoughts on that, but ultimately, you can't shine your light if you're shining your light through the filter of Don Seiler. It's not going to work. You got to shine your light. Now, none of you are still in school, and depending on teachers and parents that can tell you or can change your life. So it works very well for us. We get to understand God in our own way. So everything about us, spiritual, mental, and physical. And I tell you, sometimes here in Unity, well, people will say, and you probably heard this, you're just fine just where you are.
Yes.
You're just fine just where you are. Except maybe your doctor said you've got to lose weight. Or except maybe you've got to go to physical therapy because you got a back problem, a leg problem, other kinds of problems. That's suggesting to you that you're not just fine where you are. You're still a child of God. That none of that changed. But to tell me when I weighed 35 pounds more than I weigh now, my congregation would say, you're just fine. I said, that's not what my doctor said. She said, your blood sugar's going up, things are happening. You've got to do something. And Imelda Shanklin, she said the same thing. She said, if you don't like your physical health, do something. You don't like what's going on in your mental health, do something. That's the beauty to me of going back and a little stricter time in our unity history. But nevertheless, no matter what else we're dealing with, we're still shining our lights, shining our lights. And I mention this a lot, and I bring it in a lot. And the conversation about Bruce is a big part of it. And that is because many of us, well, I'll be really brief. When I retired from the church, I thought my opportunity to shine a light was done. Now, I'm not talking about guest speaking. I'm talking about the fact that I'm old and irrelevant. When I first retired, I'm old and I'm irrelevant. And I remember when a friend of mine retired from the Army when he was 62. Now, I was 68 when I retired. And he told me, he said, I'm old and irrelevant. And I said, oh, no, Don, let me head. So we had this long conversation, and yet I went in the same place. Yeah. I went into the same place. So the important part for us to understand is until we take that last breath, we're still shining lights here, right where we are. And we persist in that unless we decide not to. Unless we decide not to. That's the power that Imelda tells us is we are what we are. But we get to act on that and display that by choice. Moment by moment, we make a choice on how we're going to show up. So the question, I don't know if this is the right time for the question.
Yes. Go ahead.
This is the time for the question. So the question for me is, are we here as divine beings, or are we here as human beings trying to be divine? Are we here as human beings having a spiritual or spiritual beings having a human experience? Or are we spiritual beings? And the human experience is the same thing. Exactly the same thing. So let's go into a meditation place. Let's begin by paying attention to our breath. And as you pay attention to your breath, I want to ask you to breathe with your abdomen, not just making your chest go down, but put your hand on the abdomen and feel your abdomen rise and fall. This is how we see babies breathe. Their bellies go up and down. So just notice that. And as we notice our breathing, allow your brain to consider a single word, a single sacred word that might support you as we go into this time of meditation. It could be light, as we've talked about. It could be love. It could be peace. And as you settle on a word, repeat that word with each breath. And now we let go of watching the breath. And we sit here and be. We be still in the silence. As other thoughts come to your mind, use your word. Don't use the word to fight. or to get rid of the thought. Just mention your word. Love, peace, God. As we begin to return to this room, begin to simply repeat your word. And as you come more and more to this room, you can open your eyes, look about, see all the lights of the world, to see the children of God, to see the love. And so it is. Amen.
There be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. The light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.
Yay,
Yay,
God.
God. Amen.
Amen. Y'all are welcome.